Nathan Cousins was a noted and acclaimed investigative reporter. A few years ago, he wrote a book called The Healing Heart. He told a story on himself in the book. He was traveling and had spent just a few hours there in the Los Angeles International Airport. He was in between planes, and he had to make an emergency call to the office. Back in the days before cell phones. Anybody remember that? Sometimes you'd even walk into a phone booth, actually inside, and close the door. They would have these boxes with a receiver on them and a wire attached, and you would insert money into a little slot, and it would tinkle its way down to the machine, and you'd wait, and you'd finally hear that dial tone. Then you could dial your number and talk to whoever you were trying to make contact with. And he was hurrying along, and he saw a whole bank of phones, and when he got to it, he set his briefcase down, reached into his pocket, and found he only had a quarter. He opened the briefcase, looked in it, he checked all of his pockets, and he only had a quarter. And finally, he took the quarter and slid it into that little slot, and it began to tinkle down, and then suddenly there was silence. It didn't go far enough. So he reached over and he cranked on that coin release. Nothing happened. He tried it again and nothing happened. He began to crank on that coin release, and then he began to click on that receiver where you hang up the phone, and nothing happened. Man, he's getting upset, and he's cranking that coin release and clicking the receiver, and about that time a voice said, "This is the operator. May I help you?" Oh, he said, "Certainly. I put in a quarter. It swallowed my quarter. It ate my quarter. I need my change back." And she said, "Well, hit the coin release." She said, "Ma'am, I've tried the coin release. I've clicked on the receiver. I've done." Well, she said, "I'll tell you what, sir. If you'll just give me your name and your address, the phone company will send you a check for 25 cents. He said, "Ma'am, this is an emergency. I need to contact my office. I've got to get on a plane." She said, "Sir, I need your name and your address quickly, and we'll see that a check is written and sent to your home for 25 cents. "Ma'am, I don't need the 25 cents. I don't need a check for it. I need you to place the call through for me so I can get this emergency Sir, if you'll just give me your name and your address, the phone company will send you a check for 20. About that time, he hauled off and he hit that machine. And when he did, coins began to tumble out of the bottom of that box, nickels and dimes and quarters. And he opened the pockets on his suit and began to fill them up. And he opened his briefcase, and coins are falling around his feet. And he said, "Ma'am, don't worry about it." Said, "The machine is broke and it's just dumping change all over the place." She said, "Sir, would you do me a favor? Would you take those coins and insert them back in the slot of that phone box?" Now, what would you have done? I think I know. He said, "Ma'am, if you'll just give me your name and your address, we'll send you a check for..." Don't you just love that story? Well, I do. It shares a great truth about life, doesn't it? I'd like to share another truth about life found here in the 12th chapter of Luke's account, beginning with the 16th verse. It's a parable that Jesus is sharing. "The ground of a certain rich man yielded that abundant harvest. He thought to himself, 'What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops.' Then he said, 'This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns, build bigger ones, and there will I store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you've plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy.' Wouldn't that be great? 'Eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this night your soul will be demanded from you, and then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it'll be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God.'" Now we come to this biblical account about money. It's called the parable of the rich fool. And before you tune me out, we have often misunderstood the story. Often, I believe in reading the story, it appears to be about greed. But I believe there's a deeper reason why Jesus tells the parable. Neither do I want you to think that he's against those who are wealthy and that he doesn't have a warm heart toward the rich. He seems to be suggesting something different than that. Matter of fact, I think this parable has something to say to all of us on whatever economic strata that you're on. I think he's talking about something far deeper. I believe what Jesus is telling us in this parable, he's raising a question that all of us need to ask ourselves, and the question is this: what are the things in my life that I consider most important? Are they really? Do they really matter? And I think what Jesus is saying in the parable, I say it to you again, what are the things that are the most important in my life, and do they really matter? To say it another way, the things that I spend my time with, the things that I invest in, the things that I give myself to, do they really matter? Do they have eternal consequence? That's what I believe Jesus is driving at. And I've got to confess to you, I've been spending a lot of time with a rich fool this last week. I haven't been able to get him quite off of my mind. And I've wrestled with all the stereotypes that I've heard about him. And it's easy to dismiss him because as far as the world standards are concerned, all of us in the room and those that are watching, all of us are rich in many ways, are we not? Many of the things that we take for granted, like conveniences and appliances like refrigerators and stoves and microwaves and popcorn poppers and all those things, running water, filtered water, heat, air conditioning, roads and cars and trains and airplanes, all of those things that we have, compared to other parts of the world, we're far richer than they are. And I don't think this is what Jesus is driving at. You see, in this world, you always have the rich, you have the poor, you have the haves, and you have the have-nots. And I think that Jesus is wanting all of us, no matter where we're at in life, to ask ourselves the question about our spending. And I'm not talking about monetary per se. I'm talking about what are the most important thing in your life, and does it really matter in the greater strata and scheme of things? Now, I think there's some lessons in this parable that it'd be well to note. And I'd like to say it in a positive way and hopefully not in a negative way. And yet at the same time, I'd like to be faithful to my calling as a preacher and to convict myself and to convict you and to have us leave asking ourselves some questions. The first thing Jesus is saying to us about this rich fool, the tragic thing about this fool was not his wealth, but his lack of commitment to anything of lasting value. It's not his wealth that Jesus has a problem with, but he seemed so committed to things that were transitory, things of this earth, so wrapped up in the earthy, his barns and building bigger barns and constructing and calling in architects and all that, his great harvest, obviously a successful man. But Jesus tells the parable about the rich fool, not that he was a rich person, but that he lacked commitment to anything of lasting value. And we're in a world that is spending so much time and energy on things that just pass away. And we all need to be confronted with this so we can make changes in our life. I heard about a pastor that was sent by his bishop to go into an inner city church that was floundering. It was a massive building, impressive looking, but now it's in a sagging side of the city. Finances are down, people had moved away, demographics had changed, and the people were fewer, and the money was tight, and the bills were mounting up, and they wanted him to go in and revive it. What a chore. He looked it all over and he began to think about the history of that church. One time it had been grand and glorious. Once it produced great crowds. Sent many young men off to seminary to study for ministry and sent missionaries out. But now it was decadent. And he thought about the people who had gone through and their lives had been touched, and people who had been changed, and they'd moved on and become successful. And he thought, if they could only come back and share their story. He thought about one millionaire who was still a Christian. He contacted him and asked him if he would come and would he share the story with the people who were discouraged. And he came and stood on the platform and shared with them how life had been. And he said it was at this church, in this place. And he turned and looked at the young people and said, right where you're sitting, years ago, young people gathered in that same area. They brought in a guest speaker, and he preached on giving your all to Christ. Nobody had ever challenged me to that before. And he said, I sat there and I thought all I could give, I've only got $3.54. That's all I've got to my name. It's all I've got in my pocket. But he said he so challenged me that I reached in my pocket, I pulled out my $3 and counted out my 54 cents. And when the plates were passed, he said, I gave my all. And he said, in giving my all, he said, I gave my heart to Christ that morning. He said, if I had it to do over again, I'd have done the same thing. I've been successful. I've traveled the world. I've made a lot of money. I've had a lot of success. He looked at those young people and he said, that was the day that changed my life, and I was different from that point on when I learned to give my all. He said, is there any questions? And a young girl stuck her hand up and she said, sir, would you do it again? He said, what do you mean? Well, said, would you do it now? He said, I don't get your question. I bet he did. She said, well, it was easy to give $3.54 when it's all you've got. But now that you've got millions, would you do it now? And he just stood there kind of blinking. Takes your breath away, doesn't it? See, I believe that's what Jesus is driving at in this parable. He's driving at taking an inventory of our value system. It's one thing to say it, it's another thing to live it out. And the powerful message of this parable is not the wealth of the rich fool, but the fact that he seemed not to care about anything of real value. Then there's a second thing that jumps out at my thinking this week that I think is important. It's the lifestyle. The lifestyle of the rich fool illustrates a person that never discovered the joy of loving and giving. Let me tell you what I'm talking about. You've heard the old saying, if you've not been loved, you've never really lived. Can I say it a different way? If you've never been giving, then you don't know how to do your living. Notice what seems absent in the parable. Stay with me. Look at the scripture, verse 17. This rich man's talking to himself. And he said to himself, what am I going to do? He's talking to himself. Can you hear him? He's thinking. I mean, when there's nobody smart to talk to, you got to talk to yourself. What am I going to do? I guess I'll call the architects, bring in some builders. We'll throw up some big pole barns. And, man, look at the crops, the acres. And, man, what an abundance. It's a bumper crop. And I've got all this goods, and I got all this grain, and no place to store it, no place to put it up. And he said to himself, I guess I'll just build bigger barns, and I'll store it, and I'll live off of it, and I'll enjoy my life. No less than 12 times in 3 short verses, he mentions himself in one way or another. No less than 12 times. Do you know what's missing? He doesn't talk about anybody else. Is there not somebody else that he loves in life? Is there not somebody else that would love him in return? He never talks about using his resources for the greater good. And you got to understand, this is in the lifetime of Jesus, and starvation was a massive problem. Famine was everywhere, and he's building barns and storing it up and going to eat off of it, live off of it, enjoy himself. That's all he could talk about. Nobody else. Next time you hold your little baby, think about the little babies that are being aborted. You wonder sometimes when a little lady goes into the abortion clinic and says, I want you to abort my baby, and there's a 2-year-old with her, why don't we just kill the 2-year-old while we're at it? No difference. We're all about ourselves. Don't want to be bothered by anything else. That's all he could talk about. That's what I mean when I say to you this man's lifestyle. Never loving, never giving. And I've known people in my own lifetime and in my own ministry that never discovered the joy of loving another with abandon. Never giving without any strings attached. When they learn that, their lives are transformed. They're changed forever. Well, let me say it in a different way to try to drive the thought home. In the big church, St. Luke's Methodist Church down in Houston, Texas, Reverend James Moore was pastor. Knock at his office door, and in came a parishioner from his congregation, happened to be a heart surgeon. He was trembling and shaking, and in his hand he held a slip of paper. Tears going down his face. He said, I'm shaken to the core. I performed a surgery on a lady. I saved her life. I extended her life. When she got well, she came back to my office and she gave me this piece of paper. And he said, it's sort of a poem, I guess. And he said, I'd kind of like to read it to you if you don't mind. He said, it reads like this. And I'm going to read it to you. Whatever our hands touch, we leave fingerprints. On walls, on furniture, on doorknobs, on dishes, on books. Our touch leaves our identity. Oh God, wherever I go today, help me to leave heart prints, not just fingerprints. Hearts of compassion, of understanding and love. Heart prints of kindness and genuine concern. May my heart touch on a lonely neighbor or a runaway teenager or an anxious mother or perhaps a lost friend. Lord, send me out today not just to leave fingerprints, but leaving heart prints. And if anyone should say, I felt your touch, may that one sense the love of God through me. Think of all of us here. Think of all the fingerprints that are left in places during our lifetime. Regardless whether you're young or old, we're all leaving fingerprints everywhere we go. That heart surgeon said, look, Reverend Moore, I spent my life leaving fingerprints with my hands, healing, hurting people, but I don't know how many heart prints have ever really left in this world. And he said, I want to leave heart prints in the world around us. And they begun a ministry in that church, in the life of that church, called Heart Prints. And its bylaws were for the purpose of loving people who were not being loved before, and giving in ways that they'd never given before. The reason I guess it touched me and messed with me is because of this parable of the stupid fool. Never left any heart prints. He just had fingerprints on his barns and his grain and himself. I believe if anything could be said about B and C, and there's many good things that could be said about you people, I believe you're the givingest people that I've ever led in my lifetime. But I believe that our calling is to leave one gigantic heart print on this community. I look at churches and I travel and I speak in churches, and all they are is just so root bound and so ingrown. It's about us, and we spend our money. We don't want anybody messing up our building or putting a spot on our carpet or bothering us. We're just pretty happy with us four and no more. And may I say, to build a great church, it just seemed like you're going in the opposite direction of the mindset of people when you try to get them to leave a heart print. Try to build a building that's not about them, but about reaching the community. bringing in music not about them, but reaching a lost crowd and trying to get them into the kingdom. Maybe starting a preschool or a daycare or an upward basketball program or some kind of a passion play or a Christmas deal or a friend day weekend. Always a struggle. It ought to be that when we dismiss this service, that we walk out of this sanctuary so determined to leave a heart print on everybody that we meet. No longer is this about us, it's about them out yonder in the world at large. The rich fool was a fool because he kept it all to himself, and he was rich toward himself, but he wasn't rich toward God. He knew nothing about giving and loving, at least not in the parable that Jesus tells. Jesus is using this illustration to speak to us about our living. Final lesson. The rich fool was a fool because he ultimately neglected his responsibility to God when he says to himself, live it up, enjoy yourself. You've got plenty of time, many years, have fun. And God comes to him and says, you're out of time. It's midnight for you, son. You're out of time. The clock has ended on your sojourn on earth. Now what's going to happen to all the things that you've spent your life for? They're just going to set it right out on the sidewalk and sell it in a yard sale. All this years of accumulating. Pulling the junk out of your storage buildings. And he ends this parable saying something that he says nowhere else in all of the Gospels. He talks about being rich toward God. It's in that last sentence. About being rich toward God. I'm not sure, but I think this is what he means. Jesus is saying to be rich toward God is to take responsibility for the many ways that God has blessed us and use that to make a difference in our world. This man was spending his life for really something of no eternal value. No one is mentioned in his life but himself. No one to love, no one to share, no one to care, no one to receive. No one. And when he comes down to the end of it all, he's alone. The clock has run out on his life. And when Jesus says being rich toward God is what it's really all about, neglecting responsibilities to God, that's why he's a fool. Take the abilities that God has given us and use them to make a difference in somebody's life. Can you imagine all that could happen if we were to take the accumulated value of what each of us have, the hospitality, the smile, the mindset, our ability, the difference that we could make in our community and on foreign soils. 5th grade. Little boy sat in the back, sound asleep, head's down on the desk. His name's Teddy. Mrs. Thompson's the head of the class. She didn't waste any time on that kid. He wore the same clothes multiple days. Didn't bathe well, so he brought an odor to class. His books seemed like he never opened them, and his homework was always incomplete. Why waste your time? Spend your time on those that it makes a big difference. She was a Christian. She felt like she was. But why waste your time on Teddy? And so she went through her routines teaching her class and not paying much attention to the boy that sat back there sullen and quiet. And he never engaged with the other kids. And if she said a question to him, he would either say yes or no. That's all she knew about him, just kind of an irritant to her. He was going to fail the class. She wasn't going to invest any time. She was required one afternoon to check on the background of every student in her class. She waited the last on Teddy because she wasn't too impressed. She didn't love him really that much, to be honest. But when she got the records out and began to look in the 1st grade, it said a charming boy, an outgoing boy, a loving kid, and top of his class. What's his name? Teddy. I can't be. That's not the kid in my class. In second grade, the teacher had written a little note about him, said Teddy's mother is sick and he's really worried and he's trying to do his homework but can't keep his mind on target. His mother has a terminal illness. Next year, Teddy's mother died. He's failing classes. We'll just move him on, hope he gets over it and past it. Next teacher wrote, the boy comes from a one-parent household and the dad is totally disengaged and unconnected to his boy. He's grieving the loss of his wife and he's drinking a lot. Don't know if Teddy's going to make it. Boy, did that change everything in her mind. She thought, I got to love him a little more and show a little more interest. She tried, but it didn't seem to get any response. Christmas came. Kids brought presents. There was nice little boxes and beautiful paper and bows and ribbons. And she opened them and she thanked every kid. And the last present was stuck in an old used brown paper bag. And it said Teddy on it. She picked it up and she read the name Teddy Stoddard. And the kids began to snicker and laugh. And she gave them that teacher's look. You know how teachers are. Scare you to death. You wonder what God did to their face sometimes. And they quieted down and she unrolled that brown paper bag and withdrew from it a used bracelet with some of the rhinestones missing. And the kids started to snicker again, and she saw the face of Teddy as his eyes dropped and a tear started down his cheeks. So she slipped that bracelet on and she said, Teddy, the bracelet is nice. But there was something else in the bag, and she reached back in the bag and pulled out a bottle of perfume. 2/3 of it was gone, only 1/3 left. But she saw that he was looking through his tears to see what she was going to say, and so she sprayed it on her wrist. She said, that smells nice, Teddy. And he smiled back. And all the rest of the day, and the class ended, the kids flowed out, and the last to leave was Teddy, and he paused at the door, and he looked back, and he said, Mrs. Thompson, you smelled like my mother all day today. Thank you. And he said, and the bracelet makes me think of Mother. You're the best teacher I've ever had. Boy, did that change her. He stepped out of the classroom, closed the door, and she dropped her face on her desk and began to sob uncontrollably for about an hour. And she thought, all I've done is taught reading and writing and arithmetic, but I've never taught children. I think most of us forget that we're in the people business. I go into restaurants and they can't bend one way or the other. No, you got to eat exactly what's on the menu. No, we can't accept it. No, they forgot they're not in the food business. They're in the people business. They don't get in the people business, they're going to be out of the food business. And they do. They come and they go. Some of the people that work at some of these offices and the public stuff, they forgot they're in the people business. We're in people business. We need to know around the church we're in the people business. We're not in the business of religiosity. We're in the people business. You don't treat people good. I don't care whether your doctrine's right or wrong. People's not going to hang around. We're in the people business. She was in the children business, not reading, writing, and arithmetic. Boy, when the next day came, she beelined it for Teddy and said, you've got some real opportunity in you. I see potential in you. And he said, you do? And she said, if you'll stay after class a little, we'll spend some time. We're going to get this math down. We're going to get a reading and all that together. And she began to love on him and began to show appreciation and made him feel important. And by the end of the year, he was at the top of his class and excelling. She shoved him on to the next year, and he disappeared out of her life. And grade school time passed, and the years of high school time passed, and a note came in the mail. Mrs. Thompson, I want you to know I graduated second at the top of my class from high school. You're still the greatest and the most loved teacher in my life. I love you, Teddy Stoddard. No return address, so she couldn't respond. She couldn't send a little note back. And so she filed it under his name. 4 years passed, and a note came in the mail, and it said that, Mrs. Thompson, you're still my favorite teacher out of all of my teachers. I want you to know I just got my bachelor's here in college. And said it's not been easy. It's been difficult trying to work a job and try to make ends meet and still do my college work, but I came in third at the top of my class. A few more years passed, and another letter came in the mail, and this time it said, Mrs. Thompson, I want you to know that I've done well. I've graduated, and I've got me a degree now, and I found my direction in life. You're still my most favorite teacher, and I love you. But my name is longer now, signed Theodora F. Stoddard, M.D. And he said, it's all because of you. You're my favorite teacher. Love, Teddy. Matter of months, and another letter came, and this letter said, Mrs. Thompson, I met a beautiful girl and fell in love and asked her to marry me. And guess what? She said she would. Pretty good, isn't it? And said, my daddy died. I don't have any family. You're all the family I've got now. Mrs. Stoddard, would you come? And would you sit at the place where my mother would sit and be my only representative family? You know where she was? She was sitting on that chair with that rhinestone bracelet with some rhinestones missing. In the meantime, as the years had passed, she'd found where she could buy bottles of that same perfume. And she had it sprayed on and smelled like his mother. When it was over, and he slipped by and he hugged her and he whispered in her ear, he said, I'm glad you made me feel important, that maybe my life had some meaning. And you made a difference in my life so that I, in turn, can go out and make a difference in the world around me. And she began to weep, and she said, oh, no, you've got it backwards. You're the one that made a difference in my life. I thought I knew how to teach till I met you, and then you taught me how to teach. Do you realize that we have a choice this morning? We can be like this parable and like the fool that's in it, and just live to ourselves and accumulate to ourselves and never see anybody but ourselves and our little family and our little group. Or we can get a whole lot bigger than that. And we can look out around us and realize there's a God that's given us blessings and abilities and given us responsibility to use what he's given to us. I believe that's what it's like to leave a heart print on others. You say, preacher, where do I begin? I don't know where you begin. I just know where I'm going to begin. I'm going to begin with a rededication of my life to God. I think it's time to rededicate ourselves to Christ and say, God, whatever time I have left, I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to use my money. I'm going to use my wisdom, if I have any. I'm going to use my ability. I'm going to use my love. I'm going to use my hospitality, but I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to walk out of these doors to leave heart prints, not footprints, not just fingerprints, but literally to leave heart prints all over Crawford County. And the difference it'll make, it'll change the world around us. You teachers can do it. You mechanics can do it. You electricians can do it. Every one of us can leave some heart prints. When we walk out of that drugstore or that pharmacy, they'll say, wasn't they a sweet person? I wonder what's different about them. They were kind. They were gentle. They made me feel good about myself. What is it? We're leaving heart prints, not just fingerprints. Father, be God to us for a moment. Would you change us forever? Don't let us live with not understanding eternal values. Don't let us live to ourselves, about ourselves, just us. Help us to be about some others. You made others besides us. And then you've given us so much, and we have a responsibility. We can either die and be rich toward ourselves, or we can face you and be rich toward God. We don't know that we've got much treasures laid up in heaven. Some of us may be pretty bankrupt. Maybe we've got it down at Farmer Citizens or over at the People's Savings or down at United or up at First Federal or wherever it is. And some of us don't have any saving accounts where they really belong. Would you help us to get our eyes on others and on you and to make a difference in the only life that we get to live on earth? And now a lot of it's gone, and whatever we have left, this is our only opportunity to get our riches stored in heaven, where thieves can't break through and steal, and moths can't get in, and where rust can't run. We can get it on the other side of the great banks of glory. Help us not to be broke spiritually, but to lay up treasures. And I wonder, while the music's playing softly, I wonder how many would show by an upraised hand, preacher. If God will help me, I'm going to walk out of here to leave some heart prints and start storing up treasures on the other side by making a difference on this side. Can I see your hand? How about it? God being my helper, I want to make a difference. Stand with me if you would. Sing us out. Keith, if you would. Shake hands one with another. You're dismissed. May God bless you as you go.